All right, today we've got a wild story for you. It's all about greed, guilt, and a huge, unbelievable irony. We're going to look at how one of the most profitable colonial projects in history literally created the very thing that would bring it all down. And it all starts with the incredible riches of the Spice Islands. So, for centuries, we're talking over 300 years, the islands that we now call Indonesia were basically the ATM for the Netherlands. The amount of wealth they pulled out of there from spices like nutmeg and cloves, it's just staggering. It's what fueled the entire Dutch Golden Age. This wasn't just some colony, it was the engine of an empire. And that really brings us to the core question here. How did the Dutch plan to lock down their empire forever end up creating the very nation that would kick them out? It's a story that unfolds in three parts, really. First, a megacorporation fueled by pure greed. Then, a state policy of just brutal exploitation. And finally, a strange crisis of conscience that backfired spectacularly. So let's start at the beginning, and the beginning isn't a king or a queen or a government. Nope, it's a company. And believe me, this was not just any company. We're talking about the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. Okay, so the VOC gets its charter in 1602. On paper, it's a merchant company with a monopoly on the Asian spice trade. But it was so much more than that. To protect its profits, the Dutch government gave it powers that, you'd normally only see a country have. I mean, just look at this list. The VOC could wage war, execute people, negotiate treaties, print its own money, and set up colonies. At its absolute peak, this company was worth more than Apple, Google, and Amazon combined are today. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a business, it was a corporate state. It made the rules, enforced the rules, and crushed anyone who got in the way of its monopoly. But, nothing lasts forever. By 1800, after almost 2 centuries of dominance, the VOC was a mess of corruption and debt. And it just dissolved. But did the territories it controls get their freedom? No way. Instead, they got nationalized. They became the official colony of the Dutch East Indies. And this is where the exploitation kicks into a whole new, and you could argue even more brutal gear. See, back in Europe, the Netherlands itself was in deep financial trouble, basically on the verge of bankruptcy. So they looked at their new colony and said, you need to pay for yourself and for us, and you need to do it now. So in 1830, they roll out this new system, a government-run agricultural machine designed to squeeze every last cent out of the land and the people living on it. They called it the cultivation system. But to Indonesians, it's known as tanam paksa, which literally means enforced planting. And the rules were as simple as they were brutal. You either had to use 1/5 of your farmland to grow cash crops for the government, things like sugar or indigo, or you had to work for free on a government plantation for 60 days a year. It wasn't a choice. And this system created 2 completely different worlds. For the Netherlands, it was a home run. It pulled the country out of bankruptcy and made it incredibly wealthy. But for the Javanese people, it was an absolute disaster. They were forced to grow crops for export instead of rice to feed their families. And the result, especially in the 1840s, was widespread, devastating famines and epidemics. Okay, so fast forward to the end of the 19th century. Stories of what was happening in the Indies, especially after a famous novel called Max Havelaar came out, started to get back to the Netherlands. And a real sense of guilt, a crisis of conscience, started to take hold. This led to a huge shift in how they thought about the colony. This new idea really got going, pushed by people like Conrad Theodor van Deventer. And he put it in these really powerful terms. He said the Netherlands had a debt of honor. After taking so much wealth, he argued, they had a moral duty to give back, to actually improve the lives of the people they'd been exploiting for so long. And this all became an official government policy in 1901 called the ethical policy. It was built on 3 main ideas, or pillars. First, improve irrigation to help with farming. Second, move people from crowded Java to other islands, that's transmigration. And third, and this is the one that changes everything, provide education for the local population. Now, the Dutch had some very specific goals in mind with this new policy, especially the education part. But their result? Well, it was something they never, ever saw coming. It really all boils down to this one explosive question. What happens when you educate the people you rule? The Dutch were about to find out. The hard way. Let's be clear, the Dutch weren't doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. The plan was totally practical. They needed local clerks and low-level administrators to help run the giant colonial bureaucracy. It was cheaper that way. But by giving the children of the Indonesian elite a Western-style education, they accidentally gave them a whole lot more, including Western political ideas. And what were these ideas? Freedom, democracy, nationalism. All of a sudden, this new educated generation is reading about concepts that were the complete opposite of their daily reality living under colonial rule. They're learning about self-determination, about human rights, about the very idea of a nation. So the very tool they created to make loyal colonial employees ended up forging a new class of nationalist thinkers. And this was the beginning of what's now known as the Indonesian National Awakening. This was a huge deal. For the first time ever, you have people from all these different islands, from Java, Sumatra, all over, and they're starting to see themselves not as Javanese or Sumatran, but as one people with one shared future, a future free from the Dutch. And this new sense of unity hits this incredible peak on October 28, 1928. At a big youth congress, leaders from all over the island stood up and made a declaration, what's famously known as the Youth Pledge. They said, one country, Indonesia, one people, Indonesian, and one language, Indonesian. I mean, that's a revolutionary statement. The idea of Indonesia was officially born. And that brings us back to the ultimate irony of this whole story. The Dutch ethical policy, this plan to sort of fix colonialism and keep it going, was the very thing that lit the fire of the nationalist movement that would eventually tear it all down. In a way, they literally educated their own replacements. So it leaves you with this really powerful question, right? Can an empire ever truly succeed at moral reform? It can build roads and schools, sure. But if it never grants the one thing people want most, their freedom, is it just giving them better tools to one day rise up and take it for themselves?